The ship hurtled through the vastness of space, a beacon of human ingenuity. It had left Earth decades ago, seeking new worlds, new opportunities. On board were families, scientists, explorers, dreamers, people who believed in the promise of the stars. They had traveled far, further than most thought possible, into uncharted territory. And then one day, disaster struck. No one could have predicted the spatial anomaly. One moment, the ship's systems were functioning perfectly. The next, alarms blared, lights flickered, and the ship shook as if the universe itself had taken hold and decided to crush it. There was nothing the crew could do. They were at the mercy of forces far beyond their understanding. In the chaos that followed, a few children were separated from their parents. An emergency protocol was triggered, sending them in escape pods away from the crippled ship. The pods drifted into the void, carrying the children into the unknown. They were discovered by an alien race, a species so advanced that even the most sophisticated human technology paled in comparison. These beings were not like anything the children had ever imagined. They had no defined form, shifting between shapes and colors. Their bodies made of energy more than matter. Their language wasn't spoken, but rather conveyed through thoughts and emotions, a telepathic web of connection that enveloped the children the moment they were found. The aliens took the children in, caring for them as their own. Time passed and the children grew. They were raised in the alien society, taught their ways, their technology, their philosophy. The aliens had no concept of individuality as humans understood it. They existed as part of a collective consciousness, each individual a piece of a larger whole. The children, at first, found this strange and overwhelming, but slowly they adapted. Their education was unlike anything that could have been imagined on Earth. They learned to manipulate energy, to communicate through the collective mind, to see the universe in ways that transcended human perception. But with each new lesson, each new experience, they felt a growing tension within themselves. They were human, yet they were becoming something else. Something alien. As they approached adulthood, that tension became harder to ignore. Their bodies, still human in form, began to show signs of change. Their minds, once isolated and singular, had begun to open to the collective, their thoughts no longer entirely their own. They could feel the emotions of the aliens around them, the subtle currents of their society pulling at their consciousness. It was during one of their lessons, while they floated above the surface of a star, something the aliens could do with ease, that the first questions began to surface. One of the older children, now nearly an adult, asked the question that had been lingering in all their minds. Who are we? The aliens, for all their knowledge and wisdom, did not understand the question at first. In their society, identity was a fluid concept constantly shifting and evolving. But for the children, identity was more concrete. They had memories of their parents, of Earth, of a life before this one. They still saw themselves as human, but with each passing day, that definition became more uncertain. The aliens tried to comfort them, explaining that they were part of something greater, that their connection to the collective was what mattered, not their individual identity. But the children were not satisfied. They wanted to understand their place in the universe, their purpose. One night, as the stars twinkled above them in the vast alien sky, they made a decision. They would return to the place they came from. They would find humanity again, and in doing so, they hoped to rediscover themselves. The journey back to human space was not easy. Though the aliens had taught them well, the children still had much to learn about navigating the complexities of the universe. But they were determined. They gathered what knowledge they could, and with the help of the aliens, they built a ship. It was a fusion of human and alien technology, sleek and powerful, capable of traveling faster than light. As they left the alien world behind, a strange feeling settled over them. They had called that place home for so long, yet it had never truly felt like home. Not in the way Earth had. Even though their memories of Earth were distant and fragmented, the ship sliced through the fabric of space, the stars blurring into streaks of light as they approached human territory. But what they found when they arrived was not the humanity they had expected. Humanity was at war. The children, now young adults, had known of humanity's violent history. The aliens had taught them that conflict was a part of the human condition, a product of their need for individuality and competition. But they had hoped that in the time since their departure, humanity would have changed. It hadn't. The war was between humans and their alien caretakers. Somewhere along the way, humanity had made contact with the species that had raised the children. But instead of peace, there was only suspicion and fear. The humans saw the aliens as a threat, something too different, too powerful. And so, war had begun. The children were caught in the middle. They had returned to find themselves, to reconnect with humanity, but now they were torn between two worlds. The aliens who had cared for them, taught them, nurtured them, were now seen as enemies. And the humans, their own kind, were preparing to annihilate the beings who had saved them. They tried to mediate, to explain to the humans that the aliens were not a threat, that they only wanted to share their knowledge and wisdom. But the humans would not listen. Fear had taken hold, and fear, they knew, was a powerful force. As the war escalated, the children, now young adults, caught in the crossfire, had to make a choice. They had been raised by the aliens, but they were human, or at least they had been. Now, they weren't so sure. They could feel the alien influence within them, the connection to the collective, the understanding that went beyond individual thought. But they also remembered Earth, their parents, the life they had once known. They had dreamed of returning to that life, of finding a place in the human world again. Yet now, as they stood on the precipice of war, they realized that the human world might no longer be theirs. The decision weighed heavily on them. They had been taught to seek harmony, to avoid conflict. But this situation was different. Lives were at stake. Entire civilizations were at risk. They could not stand by and do nothing. In the end, they chose neither side. They would not fight for humanity, nor would they fight for the aliens. Instead, they would fight for peace. They would use the knowledge they had gained from both worlds to find a way to end the war, to bridge the gap between human and alien. It was a nearly impossible task. Both sides were entrenched in their positions, unwilling to back down. But the children, no. The young adults were determined. They had learned from the aliens how to see the world in ways that humans could not. They had learned how to connect with others, how to feel the thoughts and emotions of those around them. They used that knowledge to reach out, not just to the humans, but to the aliens as well. They showed them that war was not the answer, that there was another way. It was a slow process, filled with setbacks and dangers. But over time, they began to make progress. They spoke to the leaders on both sides, showing them the devastation that war would bring. They shared their own story, how they had been saved by the aliens, how they had grown up learning from them, but still retained their humanity. They showed that the two species could coexist, that they could learn from each other. In the end, it wasn't a single act that ended the war. It was 1,000 small actions, 1,000 conversations, 1,000 moments of connection. The young adults, standing between two worlds, became the bridge that linked them. And as peace began to take hold, they finally found their place in the universe. They were not human, not alien. They were something entirely new, something that the universe had never seen before. And for the first time, they were at peace with that. As peace settled in, the scars of war remained, etched into the memories of both humans and the aliens. The treaty that had been forged, tentative and fragile, was a start, but not an end. For the young adults who had grown between these worlds, it felt like the conclusion of one journey and the beginning of another. They had succeeded in preventing the annihilation of two civilizations, but the question of their identity still lingered. What now? They were neither fully human nor fully alien, yet they belonged to both. The path ahead was unclear, but as they stood at this new crossroads, they knew they had to confront this reality. In the aftermath of the war, the humans had begun to see them differently. At first, they were regarded with suspicion, treated as tools or messengers. The humans had difficulty accepting that their own kind could be so deeply intertwined with the aliens they had once feared. It didn't help that the young adults could now communicate in ways that went beyond human comprehension, their minds attuned to the alien collective in ways no human mind had ever been. But slowly, as they worked to rebuild trust between the two species, the perception of them began to shift. They became symbols of what could be achieved, a living example of coexistence. Yet, with that came another burden, the weight of expectations. The humans, seeing them as bridges, wanted them to serve as intermediaries in every conflict and misunderstanding. The aliens, too, placed pressure on them, expecting them to help guide humanity to enlightenment. Caught in the middle, they realized that their journey was not over. If anything, it was only beginning. One of the young adults, a woman who had once been the eldest among the children, took the lead. She had always been the one to question, to push against the boundaries of what was known. Now, she questioned the very foundations of the peace they had brokered. "We stopped a war," she said to the others as they gathered in a quiet chamber aboard their ship, a place they had made their own. "But that doesn't mean the fear and distrust are gone. We've only postponed the next conflict." They sat in a circle, their thoughts mingling not only through words but through the subtle exchanges they had learned from the aliens. Their collective understanding went beyond speech, each of them feeling the undercurrent of uncertainty, of purpose not yet realized. "We've seen both sides," another spoke, a man who had once been the quietest of the group. "We know their strengths and their weaknesses. Maybe that's our role now, showing them that they don't have to fear each other." The woman nodded but remained restless. "We've shown them, yes, but how long will it last? What happens when the next misunderstanding occurs? Or when someone new rises up with fear in their heart? This peace, it's fragile. We need more than treaties. We need to show them a new way." The others pondered her words, their minds circling around the problem, like stars in orbit. They had the knowledge of both worlds, the ability to traverse between them. But the path to lasting peace was not just about mediating conflicts. It was about transformation. One among them, a young man whose eyes always seemed to gaze beyond the present, finally spoke up. "What if we aren't meant to stay here?" The group turned toward him, their curiosity piqued. "We're not fully human anymore, nor are we fully alien. We've been shaped by both, but we don't truly belong to either. Maybe it's time to think about where we belong. Not in either world, but in the space between." The idea hung in the air, tantalizing and terrifying at once. "What are you saying?" the woman asked. "I'm saying that maybe we need to create something new, a place for people like us. A place where humans and aliens, and those like us who don't fit into either, can come together and learn from each other. A place that's free from the old divisions." The group sat in silence, the enormity of the suggestion sinking in. They had always felt caught between worlds, never fully belonging. But now, for the first time, they saw that this in-between space could be a strength rather than a weakness. "A third way," the woman murmured, her mind racing with possibilities. Not human, not alien, but something else. Excitement began to build among them. It was a radical idea, but it felt right. They had always been outliers, and now they had the chance to turn that into something powerful. "But where?" one of them asked. "Where will we go?" Both the humans and the aliens have their territories. They'd see us as a threat if we tried to carve out a place between them. The young man smiled faintly, his eyes glinting with the hint of a solution. "We've learned things from the aliens that humanity has never dreamed of. And there are parts of the universe that even they don't explore. There are forgotten places, hidden worlds. We could find one, a sanctuary," the woman said, her voice growing stronger. "A place where we can be who we are, and where others, human or alien, can come if they want to learn and live without fear." It was a daring plan, but it was also the only plan that felt like it would lead to something truly lasting. The peace they had brokered was just the beginning. Their destiny wasn't to remain as intermediaries between two worlds in constant conflict. Their purpose was to create a new world, a place where people didn't have to choose sides. As they made their preparations, they communicated their intentions to the humans and aliens. Both were surprised, some even opposed, but ultimately neither side could stop them. The young adults had become too important, too respected. They had earned the right to make their own way. They set out into the unknown, their ship once again crossing the stars. But this time, it wasn't a journey of return. It was a journey forward, into a future that was theirs to shape. They searched for months, perhaps years. Time had a way of blurring in space, but eventually, they found what they were looking for. A planet untouched and wild, nestled in a region of space where the stars burned bright but far apart, far enough from human and alien eyes alike. It was a place where they could build something new. And so they did. It started small, just a few of them, shaping the land and using their combined knowledge to create a society that could thrive. But word spread, first in whispers and then in louder voices. Humans who had grown disillusioned with their war-torn worlds began to seek them out. Aliens who had grown tired of the rigid collective came as well, curious about this place where individuals could be both themselves and part of something greater. The planet became a beacon, a sanctuary, just as they had envisioned. It wasn't perfect. There were conflicts, struggles, moments when the weight of their past threatened to tear them apart. But they always returned to the core of what they had built. A place where fear had no home, where understanding was the highest pursuit, where the old divisions no longer held sway. The young adults, now leaders of a growing community, watched as their vision took root. They had not only found their place in the universe, but had created a place for others to find theirs as well. And as the stars wheeled above them in their eternal dance, they knew that their journey, though far from over, had led them exactly where they were meant to be. As their sanctuary flourished, the young adults, now regarded as the founders of a new way of life, began to feel the true weight of leadership. What had started as an experiment in coexistence, a place where the boundaries between human and alien could dissolve, had grown into something far more complex. With each passing cycle, more travelers arrived at their planet, drawn by the promise of freedom from the past. Refugees from war-torn worlds, dissidents seeking a new home, and scholars fascinated by the merging of two species all made their way to this hidden world. The founders, once children lost in the stars, now had to manage a society that was growing faster than they had anticipated. Though they had built their sanctuary on the principles of unity and mutual understanding, they quickly learned that peace required constant vigilance. Humans and aliens alike brought their own histories, biases, and struggles. The sanctuary's existence depended on maintaining a delicate balance between individuality and collective harmony. The woman, still seen as the natural leader among them, often spent her nights standing on the cliffs overlooking the planet's sprawling settlement. Below her, the lights of homes, research centers, and communal spaces dotted the landscape, the hum of life palpable even from her vantage point. She had never imagined herself as a leader when they first fled their alien caretakers to return to human space. Now, leadership had become a mantle she couldn't shed. One night, she was joined by the man who had first suggested they create this new world. His gaze followed hers across the settlement, his mind brushing gently against hers in the silent, telepathic way they had all grown accustomed to. "You've been quiet lately," he said after a long pause. She sighed. "I've been thinking. We've built something incredible here. But sometimes, I wonder if it will last." He looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "You're worried about the newcomers?" She nodded. "Every person who arrives brings their own expectations. Some come seeking freedom, but others come looking for control. They bring the same fears and conflicts we thought we left behind." "We always knew that would happen," he replied, his voice calm. "People don't change overnight. They carry their histories with them. But can we really keep this place safe? Can we protect what we've built?" Her voice betrayed her frustration. "We stopped one war. But now I feel like we're trying to stop 100 smaller ones, all at once." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "We've always known that peace isn't permanent. It's something we have to fight for, even here." She turned to him, her eyes searching his face. What if we fail? What if the sanctuary falls apart like every other society before us? He met her gaze steadily. If it does, we rebuild. We've done it before. She smiled faintly, though the weight on her heart didn't fully lift. You make it sound so simple. It's not, he admitted, but we can't control everything. All we can do is show people that there's another way. The rest, well, we have to trust that what we've built will inspire them to try. The woman nodded, though the uncertainty still lingered. She knew he was right. They couldn't force people to change, but they could lead by example, offering a glimpse of what was possible when fear and division were set aside. Still, the pressures of leadership weighed heavily on her. In the weeks that followed, the founders convened to discuss the challenges facing their growing community. The population was expanding rapidly, and with that growth came the need for new systems to ensure that their sanctuary didn't succumb to the same cycles of conflict that plagued the galaxy beyond. The idea of governance was one that they had resisted at first, hoping to avoid the bureaucracies that had stifled both human and alien societies. But now, as they faced disputes over resources, land, and cultural differences, they realized that some form of structure was necessary. It's not about creating rules for the sake of rules, the woman explained during one of their meetings. It's about creating guidelines that help us navigate the complexity of who we are. We can't be afraid of structure just because other societies have abused it. We need something that helps us protect the principles we built this place on. The others agreed, though they each had their own perspectives on what form this new structure should take. They debated for days, sometimes clashing, but always returning to the core idea that their sanctuary had to remain a place of freedom, creativity, and cooperation. Eventually, they settled on a system that would allow for flexible leadership, where decision-making was shared and rotated, and where the community as a whole would have a voice. But even with these new structures in place, tensions continued to rise. It wasn't long before the founders were faced with a crisis that threatened to undo everything they had built. A group of human settlers had arrived, refugees from a distant war. At first, they seemed eager to integrate, to embrace the sanctuary's way of life. But it soon became clear that they harbored deep resentment toward the aliens who had raised the founders. Their memories of the war were fresh, their losses painful, and they saw the sanctuary as a betrayal. A place where humans and aliens were living in harmony when their own people had been slaughtered. It started with small acts of defiance, vandalism, heated arguments, accusations of alien favoritism. The founders tried to address the concerns of the settlers, explaining that the sanctuary was meant to be a place where past grievances could be set aside in the pursuit of something better. But the resentment ran too deep. Soon, the acts of defiance escalated into violence. One night, a fire broke out in one of the alien quarters, consuming an entire section of the settlement. Though no one was killed, the message was clear. The settlers wanted to take back what they saw as a human world. The founders were faced with an impossible decision. They could expel the settlers, but doing so would undermine the very principles of openness and understanding that they had built the sanctuary on. Or they could try to mediate, risking further violence. The woman stood before the gathered crowd, the flames of the smoldering buildings casting a harsh glow across their faces. The settlers, the aliens, the other inhabitants, all looked to her for answers. This place was meant to be a sanctuary, she said, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. A place where we could move beyond the old divisions. But we cannot allow hatred to take root here. We've all lost something in the wars that brought us here. We've all suffered. But this, she gestured to the burned buildings, this is not the way forward. A voice shouted from the crowd, one of the settlers. And what would you know about suffering? You were raised by them. You've forgotten what it means to be human. The accusation cut deep, but she remained calm. I haven't forgotten, she replied. But I've also learned that being human doesn't mean we have to carry our hatred forever. We can choose something different. Easy for you to say, the settler spat. You weren't there. You didn't watch your family die at their hands. The crowd murmured, the tension thickening. You're right. she said quietly. I wasn't there. I didn't live through what you did, but I know that if we let that pain define us, we'll never find peace. Not here, not anywhere. For a moment, it seemed like the settlers would erupt in anger. But then slowly, others in the crowd began to speak up, both humans and aliens, echoing her words, sharing their own stories of loss and healing. The collective voice grew, a chorus of shared pain but also shared hope. The settler who had spoken fell silent, his eyes scanning the faces around him. Finally, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. The crisis had been averted, but only just. The founders knew that this was only the beginning of the challenges they would face. But as they stood together, watching the crowd slowly disperse, they also knew that they had built something worth fighting for. The sanctuary wasn't perfect. It was fragile, as all things worth having are, but it was real. And as long as they continued to believe in it, they would find a way to keep it alive. Together, in the months that followed, the sanctuary settled into a new rhythm. The tension from the crisis still lingered, but the founders worked tirelessly to heal the divisions. Slowly, the settlers who had once harbored anger began to soften, their bitterness eroded by the sense of community that had always been the sanctuary's strongest foundation. It wasn't easy. Some wounds never fully healed, but the fires of hatred began to cool, replaced by cautious hope. The founders continued their roles as guides, mediators, and protectors of this fragile peace. They had come to understand that the sanctuary's strength lay not in its perfection, but in its ability to evolve. Each conflict, each struggle, was an opportunity to grow, to reinforce the principles of unity and mutual understanding that had brought them here in the first place. One evening, as the sun set behind the distant mountains, casting the landscape in hues of gold and violet, the woman and the man who had been by her side since the beginning stood together once more on the cliff overlooking the settlement. Below them, life continued. Children played, families gathered, and the lights of new homes flickered in the twilight. "It's still standing," the woman said with a small smile, her gaze softening as she watched the scene unfold. "I wasn't sure it would." The man nodded, his eyes reflecting the same quiet satisfaction. "Neither was I, but we made it through, and so did they." She looked at him, her heart full of both relief and the weight of all they had endured. "Do you think it will last?" He considered her question for a moment, then said, "I think it will, but not because of us, because of them. We gave them a foundation, but they're the ones building it now. We don't have to do it alone anymore." She smiled at that, feeling a sense of peace settle over her that she hadn't felt in a long time. He was right. The sanctuary had outgrown them, becoming something bigger than the founders themselves. It was now in the hands of the people who lived there, people who had come to believe in the vision they had fought so hard to protect. As they stood together, watching the stars begin to appear in the sky, the woman felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. They had set out to create a place where the old divisions didn't matter, where humans and aliens, and everyone in between, could coexist. And somehow, against all odds, they had succeeded. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was alive, thriving, and growing. And that was enough. "We've done what we came here to do," the woman said softly. The man smiled, his gaze turning skyward. "Yes, we have." And with that, they stood in silence, watching the stars blaze across the night sky, knowing that the sanctuary, fragile, resilient, and full of promise, would endure.